So the word corruption has become somewhat of a virtue signal dog whistle of the pro Putin Russia shills, uh, when all they really mean to say, I think, when they say corruption is Ukraine bad, guys, right? Now, first of all, whenever did I say that corruption is wrong, right? Whenever did I grant you that corruption is wrong, it's a sin, it's morally incorrect, right? Because if the laws are morally incorrect, going against those laws, right? Corruption would probably might be morally correct, right? So I've never granted you that corruption is wrong, right? And you never made a case for why corruption is wrong. You never made an argument for why it's wrong, and you never uh, told me what sort of corruption it is that you're talking about when it comes to Ukraine, because you don't know what you're talking about, right? And you don't care about corruption. When you say corruption or Ukraine is corrupt, it's a dog whistle, because what you're really saying is that Ukraine is bad, Russia's good, right? Because you're not talking about the rampant, which, by the way, is a big reason why Russia has sucked in this war, right? The rampant corruption in Russia. So you're not really interested in corruption. You just want to beat down the Ukrainian people, right? Because you're pro Russia. Like, how is this rocket science, right? And so let's talk a little bit about corruption in the post Soviet states, which includes Russia, right? So when there was this, and look, I'm no expert, there's people who could tell you a lot more about this, but I have somewhat of an idea, right? When the system method of governance changes, right, or changed in those countries from more or less, some places more, some places less, communism to free market capitalism, whatever the hell you want to call it, right? There was this lag between what was happening on the streets or in business or in society and the legislature, right? They had to write the laws to, well, fetter this capitalism, because unfettered capitalism is just going to lead you right back to communism, right? Or fascism, some form of authoritarianism, right? Which is exactly what happened in Russia, right? Because in a society that was kept down and never taught how to engage in market economy, capitalism, how to make money, how to open up businesses, run businesses, yada, 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 right? People who didn't have that culture, the few people who applied themselves, learned this new culture, they benefited greatly because there was very little competition for them and they knew their way around, you know. There was no laws to prevent them from doing some questionable shit, so on and so forth. And they were just wheeling and dealing, making billions of dollars, right? And then you had this oligarchical class that Putin had to come in and become part of, right? He had to become the number one oligarch in order to have the power, right? It's like Russia is run like a, you know, prison mafia system, basically, right? If you step out of line, you get assassinated. Oh, good mother, right there. He goes to church. He says Jesus once in a while, and he makes fun of gay people. Russia, good. So yeah, don't stand too close to a 40th story window if you're a problem for Putin in Russia, basically, right? Never walk downstairs. Don't eat dinners in public, right? Have someone taste all your food, and definitely don't take any helicopter trips. Boats, forget about it. Stay off boats too. Russia, good. Come on, why do you guys do this to yourselves? Anyway, back to corruption. Um, yeah, and then so then you start writing laws. You start trying to control these oligarchs because they have too much power and they threaten your ascension. And maybe they're not too willing to change right away because going is good. they're living high on the hog, and or they're not maybe even aware of some of these laws, yada yada yada, right? So you let these people do as they will, and then you start writing laws preventing them from doing what they were doing, right? Gee, you think you might have some corruption? So yeah, all these the whole post-Soviet space has just been full of corruption. But on average, right, in general, as the West exerted more of its influence, right, more rules, right, more legislature, uh, all in all, corruption has waned. Right? Poland used to be very corrupt, but the more westernized it became less corrupt. This is just what it is, right? I'm not saying it's good or bad. You guys are. You guys are saying corruption is bad, right? But Russia good, and the West is bad. So which is it? Can you make up your mind finally? Because you motherfuckers are so incoherent. It's just so appalling, right? And when you talk about this corruption in Ukraine, right? Do you distinguish between the Russian speakers and the because it's very important to you, right? Oh, those people in Ukraine speak Russian, so they must be Russian. Or those people in Ukraine are actually Russians. When you talk about this corruption, right? Not only are you not talking about the specifics here, what is it that you're talking about? It all of a sudden it doesn't matter whether it's Russian Ukrainians, or pro-Russian Ukrainians, or whatever Ukrainians, right? Because a lot of this corruption, as it's happening, especially right now during the war, well, that's pro-Russian corruption, right? What do you think is happening to the funds that are being sent? And you talk about this, right? U.S. is sending funds to arm the Ukrainians, right? And a lot of this money is being misappropriated, right? So I think it's fair to say that if the money that's designated to arm Ukraine to defend itself against Russia is being misappropriated and used for something else, clearly it cannot be pro-Ukrainians that are doing this, right? And chances are, and rest assured, in many cases that is the case, right? It's fucking Russian agents stealing that money because they don't want to arm Ukrainians. So in effect, what it is that you're doing is blaming Russia for the corruption in Ukraine. Except you're blaming Ukrainians, right? But a lot of this corruption you're talking about is Russian corruption because Russia is corrupt as fuck. And look, I explained to you what corruption is, right? I'm not putting a value judgment on it. You are. So all the while you're saying Russia good, corruption bad, you're motherfucking incoherent. You're contradicting yourself, right? A lot of this corruption in Ukraine that you talk about is Russian influence. Of course it is. Is is Putin bitching and moaning and crying about Ukrainian corruption all the damn time? No, because he's the one putting it there. Who's complaining about Ukrainian corruption? The West. Why? Because that's a dog whistle for Russian influence. When the West says corruption, they mean Russian influence. Because that's what it is, right? Why did Crimea fall so easily? Well, because of treason, right? Because a lot of those generals or military personnel who were supposed to be Ukrainian were just Russian shills. And they just lied down and, put on the Russian uniform. They shed their Ukrainian uniform and put on the Russian one, right? Uh, Ukraine has arrested, their intelligence arrested a ton of Russian collaborators in the beginning stages and right before this war, right? Which is why Russia's been one of the reasons why Russia wasn't able to do what they did in Crimea. And they thought they were going to just run through Ukraine and be welcomed with open arms like they were in Crimea more or less. People were just going to lie down, right? Because they had their tentacles, corruption, all up in Ukraine. And what Ukraine has done with U.S. influence and intelligence, NATO, if you will, right, was able to fight this corruption, which is why it's doing so much better than it did in 2014, right? So, I mean, yeah, Ukraine's corrupt. And we all know why. Well, now you guys also know why, right? Those of you pro-Russian stooges, right? You know why. And I'm not saying there isn't like homegrown Ukrainian corruption. Yeah, there's that too. I addressed that in this video in case you didn't pay attention, right? But a lot of this corruption that you bitch and moan about, that's Russian influence that the West is fighting, right? So which is it? West good or the West bad? Russia good or Russia? Which is it, guys? Can you make up your minds, right? But this is what happens once again when you have a predetermined conclusion because you fell in love with Putin or some of the things he had to say about some issues, which I also agree with, just sounded good to you, and you assume that everything else he says must be true because he spoke some truths. You essentially you have a hard on for Vlad. Let's just keep it real, right? Euphemism, but you get the point. And then what follows from that is reverse engineered reality or reverse engineered justifications for why you fell in love with Vlad, right? That's why you don't make any sense. That's why you don't know what you're talking about. So just, and all you guys could, all you have is just, you don't have any argument. It's just corruption, Minsk agreement, genocide. The level of geopolitical, and I ain't shit. Let's just keep it real. I ain't shit, right? But the level of geopolitical analysis by some of you Putin shills is just, it's garbage, right? It's corrupt. It's degenerate, right? Anyway, I, wow. Thanks for watching.